The MCU villains have been less than wonderful at times, but as I commented on my last video, wonderfully put it, that really doesn't come down to the actors or their performances, just how they were handled in the MCU. So today I'm recasting those villains who let us down or didn't live up to that potential that they had. Like in the last couple videos within the series, I'm recasting for today, so I've been recasting the MCU as well as the Avengers, so if you haven't watched the previous videos and you're looking for a character, it's likely in one of those. But before we get started today, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Likewise. Now, if you're anything like me, you fly through TV shows and movies constantly, and you're wondering what the hell to watch next. Well, Likewise can help with that. It's powered by ratings from real people, as well as your own likes, to recommend you the next thing to watch. All you need to do is tell the app which genre and titles you like, and then it gives you recommendations personalized to you. For me, sometimes I get hung up on what's new, what's coming out in theaters, that when I'm going through my personalized recommendations, it reminds me of the classics that I always wanted to watch. It also keeps track of your personal favorites so you can look back on those, or you can follow people or groups to look at the recommendations they might have as well, or simply use Ask to receive recommendations straight from the Likewise community. So click the link in the description below to download the Likewise app. The app is 100% free, and make sure you follow me for my recommendations and what I'm currently watching. As for the castings today we're going to tackle Red Skull, Taskmaster, Malekith, Whiplash, and Abomination. So let's recast the villains for the MCU. Now first up we have Red Skull, the only villain on here that I can say had so much potential without changing what the MCU did to the character. Everyone else I had a little bit of disappointment with seeing them on screen. Red Skull, however, the disappointment is what they didn't do. When Red Skull got beamed up into the Enterprise, I expected we'd see him in a big role in the MCU and definitely see him later on, and not some just cameo as a gatekeeper. But if I want to change anything, it's just to change Red Skull to expand on many movies over many years. Now with Red Skull, he's clearly a Nazi, a German, and kinda a little bit of a maniac. Now I do really love the theatric nature that Weaving brought to this role, and I do think it is required to go a little bit over top for a role like this one. But I think we can go a little bit darker here, and a little bit more disturbed. That's why I end up landing on Gustav Waltz, who yes, of course, can really do any kind of bad guy, but I think he has more range than we've seen in the past. I think he can really go darker in this role. I think the best example is this brief stint as Blofeld within the Bond series. But of course Spectre wasn't very good, so it never really landed in the way it possibly could. I do think he can go big and bold, like Weaving, but also bring that intelligence, that disturbed nature, and more quietness to his role.
You're sheltering enemies of the state, are you not?
Yes.
You're sheltering them underneath your floorboards, aren't you?
So Gustav Waltz as Red Skull. Next up we have Malekith. Now, with Malekith, he might be the most disappointing villain ever in the MCU. He definitely ranks towards the top of the worst. That does not come down to Christopher Eccleston at all. If anything, Christopher Eccleston was actually the perfect choice here, but the movie gives him absolutely nothing to work with, and we end up getting a stoic yet forgettable villain. Now, I obviously want to change his character so we can give him the same amount of power and personality that we see in the comics. Like, if you look at any single frame within the comics, he has this unsettling smile. Even looking at these drawings from the comics, you can tell they were way off in the MCU. Now, I end up wanting to go with someone who has that vibe. Someone who I can see have a little bit more fun in this role, and someone who can go a little bit more out there. I went with Gustav Skazgard. I can see him definitely playing into the menacing side of this character if he wants to double down on that, but he's got this personality and this fun nature within Vikings that's a little bit off the wall that I think Malekith definitely needs.
Pathian king once sent 400 assassins to claim my head. I burned them all in a lightning storm that lasted 7 whole days. Tell Lord Greyrim I'm insulted by this paltry show of force.
I think he can also do the emotional as well, but I can see him transforming this character into something great. So Gustav Skazgard as Malekith. Next up, let's do Taskmaster. Now, don't get me wrong, I didn't hate Taskmaster in Black Widow, but then again, I've never really loved this character in the comics. Now, I'm going to look at the comics, of course, for inspiration, and pretend like we're getting a slightly different version of this character. One that isn't mute, and one that can show the dominance and his personality in the role. Now, if we were basing this on Black Widow, and changing it slightly to really meet what the comic demands of the role, I think Scott Adkins is a perfect fit here. It's a matter of time before he gets cast as a superhero or a supervillain, and he's built for this role. I mean, the man's a god when it comes to stunts and martial arts, but if you want to derive from the comics with a little bit of that cheeky personality, I think actually Scott could do wonderfully here.
I'm crying, you queen!
No, well, it wasn't the Queen, actually, mate. No, it was King. King George III, to be precise, but I wouldn't expect you lot to know that. So allow me to educate ye geriatric yank.
moments. He can undercut the tension with a little bit more remarks, and definitely play into the quippy nature of Marvel. So Scott Adkins as Taskmaster. Next up we have Whiplash. Now, Whiplash could have been interesting. Mickey Rourke really went fully into this role, kind of shot himself in the foot. I mean, he insisted on the bird, mumbled his way through his lines, and seemed almost too laid back for the character. Now, I obviously want to double down on that intensity and the darkness here, because I feel like the character was portrayed somewhere between menace and comic relief, and it didn't work at all for me. Ivan should be around the age of Tony Stark, so an older actor is required. Now, I went with Peter Sormer, who I feel like is straight out of a Russian prison. I mean, his intensity is something that few actors can bring to a role. I love him as just a character actor who transforms. I feel like he would ground this character, make it believable, and make it so much less silly.
Not only strength, it takes talent, because it's a craft. You have to do it right, or the cow gets angry, and angry meat tastes bad. Yeah, you need arms to break the skull. That's not the goal. The goal is to crush the brain inside the skull. His art.
You can definitely lean into the Russian accent and the origins made in the MCU, or change it around a little bit and make it a little bit more comic accurate. Still, I think he would kill this. So Peter Sormer as Whiplash. Lastly, we have Abomination. Now, Abomination recently has come back in Shang-Chi, but honestly, I kind of chose to forget about the Incredible Hulk overall. I mean, Edward Norton was recast, I didn't like it very much when I saw it, and generally when I'm rewatching the MCU, I kind of skip it completely. Now, I actually had to go back and watch the Abomination scenes to remind me of him, and I was surprised how much Tim Roth works in this role. I think he honestly brings it here. I think his intensity and his performance here in a better movie would have been something great. But at the end of the day, the movie doesn't really serve him that well. Now, if we're talking about this character, I think we need that little bit of unhinged intensity that really drives him to become Abomination. I like the worn down yet unrelentless nature of this character, and that's why I went with Daniel Craig. I think he could really sell that persistence and that transformation and the inner turmoil of this character. I think he brought an almost similar vibe I want to this character with Bond, but in a villainous role, I think it would work wonderfully. I think he'd do the military vibe if required to do that, as well as he has that kind of face and that personality that makes you just kind of question him a little bit.
And even some where there is no magisterium and no authority.
So Daniel Craig as Abomination. So there is the recasting of the Avengers, the MCU, the villains, everyone in between. I was thinking about doing one more episode about the Spider-Man villains within the MCU, since I've already done all the other villains. But that's only if you guys want to see that. So let me know in the comments below, as well as let me know what you'd like to see next. I got a couple in mind, but I'd like to see your thoughts. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.